The room fell silent when she walked in carrying the rifle case. Not because they respected her. Not because they knew what she had done in the mountains of Afghanistan. They fell silent because every man in that briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command Coronado was trying to figure out how this small woman had ended up in their selection cycle. Chief Petty Officer Ren Adebayo stood 5 feet 4 inches tall. She weighed 123 pounds, soaking wet. And she had just walked into a room full of the most elite warriors on the planet who had already decided she did not belong. Commander Drake Hollister stood at the front of the room with his arms crossed over his chest. 20 years in the teams had carved his face into something that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and then left out in a sandstorm. He watched her find a seat in the back row with the same expression a man might wear while watching a mouse wander into a snake pit. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed someone underestimated who proved everyone wrong. Ren set her rifle case down beside her chair and felt the weight of 47 pairs of eyes pressing against her back. She had felt this weight before. In boot camp, in Scout Sniper School, in every room she had ever entered wearing a uniform. The weight never got lighter. She had simply gotten stronger. The candidate beside her was young, maybe 23 or 24. His name tape read Oduya. His hands were shaking so badly that his pen was tapping against his notebook in a rhythm that had nothing to do with music. He was trying to disappear into his chair, and Ren recognized that look too. The look of someone who had already decided they were going to fail. Commander Hollister began speaking, and his voice filled the room like a thunderclap fills a valley. Welcome to the first day of the rest of your very short careers. Half of you will not make it to the end of this week. 3/4 of you will not make it to the end of this month. And statistically speaking, only 4 of you will complete this program and earn the right to call yourselves operators. He paused, and his eyes swept the room with the precision of a targeting laser. I see some new faces this cycle. Some transfers from other branches who think their previous experience qualifies them for what we do here. Let me be clear. Nothing you have done before matters. Nothing you think you know applies. You are all equally worthless until you prove otherwise. His gaze stopped on Ren. Chief Petty Officer Adebayo. Stand up. Ren rose from her chair with a smoothness that came from years of making herself small and controlled. She stood at attention and met his eyes without flinching. The commander walked between the rows of seats until he was standing directly in front of her. He towered over her by nearly a foot. Chief Adebayo comes to us from Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, where she was an instructor. She has been selected for an experimental joint operations program that some pencil pusher in Washington dreamed up. A program that puts her in my selection cycle despite the fact that she has never seen real combat. That was a lie. Ren felt it land in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. But she said nothing. She had learned long ago that the truth was not always a weapon to be drawn in the first battle. Master Chief Rourke, Hollister called out. A man built like a fire hydrant stood up from the front row. His neck was wider than Ren's thigh, and his hands looked like they could crush bowling balls. Master Chief Rourke will be running your physical evaluations. He has a particular interest in making sure every candidate is held to the same standard. Hollister smiled, and it was not a kind smile. The same standard, not a different standard, not an easier standard. The same. Ren understood what he was saying. She had heard it before in different words from different men. You do not belong here. You will never belong here, and I will personally make sure you fail. She remained at attention and kept her face as empty as a cloudless sky. Dismissed, Chief. You may sit. Ren sat. Beside her, Oduya had stopped shaking. He was staring at her with something that looked like a mixture of pity and awe. After the briefing, the candidates filed out toward their assigned barracks. Ren walked alone, her rifle case balanced on her shoulder, when she heard the commotion behind the equipment shed. 3 candidates had Oduya pressed against the corrugated metal wall. The biggest one, a man whose neck was so thick his head seemed to sit directly on his shoulders, was jabbing a finger into Oduya's chest. You think you can hack it here, little man? The big candidate's voice carried the flat accent of someone from Midwest. You were shaking like a scared puppy in there. Why do you not just ring the bell now and save us all the trouble of watching you cry?" Oduya said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the ground, and his shoulders were hunched in the universal posture of prey, hoping the predator will lose interest. Rin set her rifle case down. The three candidates turned toward her. The big one laughed. "Oh, look, the Lady Marine wants to play hero. What are you going to do, sweetheart? Shoot us a mean look?" Rin walked forward until she was standing between them and Oduya. She was half the size of any of them. She looked like a sparrow that had wandered into a gathering of hawks. "I was not planning on doing anything," she said. Her voice was soft and level. "I just want to get a good look at the three men who are so scared of failing that they need to tear someone else down to feel better about themselves." The big candidate's face flushed red. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me." Rin did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She stood there like a stone in a river, letting the current break around her. The ones who wash out first are always the ones who spend their energy on everyone else instead of focusing on themselves. I have seen it 100 times. So please keep going. Keep wasting your energy. It makes my job easier. The three men looked at each other. Something passed between them, some calculation of risk and reward, and they made their decision. The big one spat on the ground near her feet. "This is not over," he said, and they walked away. Oduya let out a breath he had been holding for what seemed like minutes. His eyes were wide. "Why did you do that? You just made enemies on your first day." Rin picked up her rifle case. "I have been making enemies since the day I enlisted. A few more will not change anything." She started walking toward the barracks. After a moment, Oduya fell into step beside her. "I am Micah," he said. "Micah Oduya. I know. I read your name tape." He laughed nervously. "Right? Of course." He was quiet for a few steps. "Is it true what the commander said? That you have never seen real combat?" Rin did not answer immediately. They walked past the training grounds where tomorrow would bring the first of many evolutions designed to break them. Past the pool where candidates would learn to drown and resurrect themselves over and over again. Past the bell that hung in the center of the compound, the bell that anyone could ring at any time to make all of this stop. She looked at that bell for a long moment. The commander said a lot of things, she finally replied. Not all of them were true. That night, Rin sat alone in her quarters. She had been given a private room, another reminder that she was different, separate, other. She opened her rifle case and removed the components one by one. The stock, the barrel, the scope. Each piece was immaculate, maintained with a precision that bordered on obsession. The scope was old, older than her career. It had belonged to her grandfather, a man who had learned to shoot in the frozen hills of Korea and had taught her everything he knew before the cancer took him. She held it up to the light and remembered his voice. "Patience, little bird. The shot is not about strength. It is not about speed. It is about patience. The bullet will find its target. Your only job is to wait for the moment when waiting is no longer necessary." She reassembled the rifle in the darkness, her hands moving from memory, and tried not to think about the faces of the men she had seen through the scope. The men who would never see anything again because her patience had been greater than their caution. There was a knock at her door. Ren set the rifle aside and opened it to find Lieutenant Commander Tobias Shun standing in the hallway. He was one of the training officers, a man in his mid-30s with the kind of face that gave away nothing. "Chief Adebayo," he said. "May I come in?" She stepped aside and let him enter. He looked around the sparse room, and his eyes lingered on the rifle for a moment longer than necessary. "I wanted to introduce myself properly," he said. "I will be overseeing the tactical portions of your evaluation." Ren nodded. She had learned to wait, to let others fill the silence with their intentions. Shun hesitated. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "Your file was forwarded to me before your arrival. Most of it is standard. Service record, qualifications, instructor evaluations." He paused. "But there are portions I cannot access. Portions that are classified above my clearance level." Ren said nothing. "I have been in the Navy for 14 years, Shun continued. "I have seen classified files before, but I have never seen a file where the classification level exceeds that of a commander running a special operations selection program." He looked at her, and for the first time, Rin saw something other than assessment in his eyes. She saw curiosity, and beneath that, something that might have been respect. "Whatever you did," he said quietly, "whatever is in those files, Commander Hollister does not know about it. But I requested additional access this morning." And she moved toward the door. "And I was denied, personally, by someone at JSOC." He opened the door and paused at the threshold. "Get some sleep, Chief. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." He left. Rin stood in the silence of her quarters and looked at the rifle her grandfather had given her. The rifle that had reached out across 3,247 meters of mountain air and changed the course of a battle that officially never happened. Somewhere on this base, a man with stars on his shoulders was making phone calls, asking questions about a woman whose answers were buried so deep that even a SEAL commander could not dig them up. Rin turned off the light and laid down in the darkness. Tomorrow would be a long day, but she had waited longer than this. She had waited in the cold and the wind and the silence for targets that did not know death was patient. She could wait a little longer for Commander Hollister to learn the same lesson. In a small office across the base, Lieutenant Commander Shun sat at his desk with her file open in front of him. Most of the pages were standard, but at the back of the folder, behind a red classification cover he did not have the authority to open, something waited. He reached for the cover, hesitated, then slowly lifted it anyway. His eyes went wide. He read the first line 3 times to make sure he understood what he was seeing. Then he closed the file very slowly and sat back in his chair, staring at nothing, trying to reconcile the small woman he had just met with the single sentence that would change everything. Confirmed kill. 3,247 meters. Hindu Kush. Target designation classified. Shun reached for his phone. Then he stopped. Some secrets, he realized, were buried deep for a reason. And some secrets had a way of digging themselves out. The sun had not yet risen over Coronado when the barracks doors slammed open and Master Chief Rourke's voice shattered the silence like a brick through glass. "On your feet. You have 30 seconds to be dressed and standing on the grinder, or you're all going for a swim in the Pacific." Rin was already awake. She had been awake for an hour, lying in the darkness, running through scenarios in her mind the way her grandfather had taught her to run through windage calculations. By the time Rourke's boots hit the hallway floor, she was dressed and moving. The grinder was a concrete courtyard in the center of the compound. 47 candidates assembled in ragged rows, breath misting in the cool morning air, while Rourke paced in front of them like a predator deciding which gazelle to chase first. Commander Hollister emerged from the training building with a clipboard in his hand. He looked well-rested. He looked like a man who had slept soundly knowing that today would bring him satisfaction. "First evolution," he announced. 4-meal beach run. Full gear. 32-minute cutoff. Anyone who fails to meet the time standard will be placed on probationary status. A murmur rippled through the candidates. For miles in soft sand with a full combat load was brutal. 32 minutes was nearly impossible. Rin did the math in her head. 8-minute miles in sand with 50 pounds of gear. It could be done, but it would cost everything she had. The candidates lined up at the beach access point. The Pacific stretched out before them, gray and endless, the waves crashing against the shore with the indifference of something that had been destroying things since before humans learned to walk upright. Rourke raised his starter pistol. "On my mark." Rin felt Micah beside her. His breathing was rapid and shallow. She leaned toward him without turning her head. "Steady your breath. Match your footfalls to your exhales. Do not think about the finish line. Think about the next step." The pistol cracked. The pack surged forward and immediately began to spread. The fastest candidates pulled ahead, their legs churning through the sand with a power that came from months of specific training. Rin settled into her pace, found her rhythm, and began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. By the first mile, 5 candidates had already fallen behind the main group. By the second mile, 3 more had dropped. The sand pulled at her boots like it was trying to drag her down into the earth, and every step required twice the effort it would have taken on solid ground. Micah was struggling. She could hear his breathing growing ragged, could see his stride shortening as his muscles began to fail. He was going to fall behind. He was going to fail the first evolution on the first day. Ren adjusted her pace. She dropped back until she was running beside him. "Do not look at them," she said. "Do not think about them. You are not racing them. You are racing yourself. The only person who can beat you right now is you. I cannot do this." His voice came in gasps. "I am not fast enough. You are exactly fast enough. You just need to believe it for 18 more minutes." Ren kept her voice steady, even as her own lungs began to burn. "I have seen men twice your size quit because they convinced themselves they could not finish. And I have seen men half your size cross lines they had no business crossing because they refused to stop. Which one are you going to be?" Something changed in Micah's eyes. The panic did not disappear, but something harder rose up beneath it. Something that looked like the first spark of defiance. They ran. The third mile nearly broke them both. Ren's thighs screamed. Her shoulders ached under the weight of her pack. The sand seemed to grow softer, deeper, more treacherous with every step. But she kept counting, kept breathing, kept moving. At the 4-mile marker, a cluster of instructors stood with stopwatches. Ren crossed the line at 31 minutes and 47 seconds. Micah crossed 3 seconds behind her. They collapsed onto the harder sand near the waterline, chests heaving, sweat soaking through their uniforms. Around them, other candidates were finishing in various states of destruction. Rourke walked over with his clipboard. He looked at Ren with an expression that suggested he had just bitten into something sour. 31:47. He said the numbers like they were an accusation. "You made the cutoff. Was there some confusion about whether I would?" Rourke's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He moved on to the next candidate. Micah rolled onto his back and stared at the sky. "How did you do that? How did you make me believe I could finish?" Ren sat up slowly, every muscle in her body protesting. "I did not make you believe anything. I just reminded you what you already knew." The rest of the morning was a blur of evolutions. Obstacles, calisthenics, combat swimming, each one designed to push the candidates past their limits and see who would break. By noon, 6 more had rung the bell. The brass gleamed in the sunlight each time someone grabbed it, each time someone decided that enough was enough. Ren did not break. She did not excel either. She finished in the middle of the pack on every evolution, never first, never last, never drawing attention to anything except her ability to endure. Micah noticed. "You are holding back," he said during a brief water break. "On the shooting portion this morning, you could barely hit the target. But I watched your hands. They were steady as stone. You missed on purpose." Ren drank from her canteen and did not answer. "Why would you do that? Why would you hide what you can do?" "Because showing them what I can do is not the same as proving it," she said quietly. And right now, proving it would only make things harder. Before Micah could respond, Hollister's voice cut through the afternoon air. "All candidates, assemble in the briefing room. Now." They gathered in the same room where everything had started just hours ago. It felt like days had passed. Ren took a seat near the back again, her body aching, her mind already racing through possibilities. Hollister stood at the front with a new expression on his face. He looked like a man who had just received a gift. "Tomorrow," he announced, "we will be conducting an unscheduled evaluation, a special assessment designed to test skills that are not part of the standard curriculum." He paused, and his eyes found Ren in the back of the room. "Chief Adebayo, you were an instructor at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. Is that correct?" "Yes, Commander." "Then you should have no problem with tomorrow's assessment." He smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "We will be conducting a long-range precision shooting exercise. Targets at distances ranging from 500 to 1,500 meters. Any candidate who fails to achieve a minimum qualifying score will be removed from the program." Murmurs erupted throughout the room. Most of the candidates were not snipers. Most of them had never fired a rifle at anything beyond 400 meters. "This is not fair," someone muttered. "This is not part of the standard program." Hollister's smile widened. "War is not fair. The enemy does not care about your standard program. And if you cannot adapt to unexpected challenges, you do not belong in special operations." He looked at Ren again, and she understood exactly what he was doing. He was betting that she would either fail publicly and prove his point that she did not belong, or she would succeed and expose skills that would make her a target for even more scrutiny. He was trying to force her hand. Dismissed. The candidates filed out. Micah walked beside Ren, his face troubled. He is doing this because of you. This whole thing is designed to make you fail. Maybe, Ren said, or maybe it is designed to make me show them what I can do. And if you do, what happens then? Ren did not answer. She walked back to her quarters alone as the sun began to set over the Pacific. The light turned the water into liquid copper, and for a moment, she stood at the edge of the compound and watched the waves roll in with their ancient rhythm. Her grandfather had brought her to the ocean once. She had been 7 years old, and they had stood on a beach in California not so different from this one. He had told her that the ocean never stopped. It never quit. It just kept coming, wave after wave, wearing down everything in its path through nothing more than persistence. Be like the ocean, little bird, he had said. They will try to stop you. They will build walls and dig trenches and throw everything they have at you. But you just keep coming, wave after wave, until there is nothing left of their walls but sand. In her quarters, Ren opened her rifle case and removed her grandfather's scope. She held it up to the fading light and saw the scratches and worn spots that came from decades of use. This scope had seen combat in Korea. It had trained countless shooters at ranges across Montana. And it had been with her in the Hindu Kush when she had done something that most people believed was impossible. She thought about the shot, the one that lived in classified files and redacted reports, the one that had changed everything and nothing at the same time. 3,247 meters, nearly 2 miles. A shot that the physics said was improbable and the logistics said was impossible. But she had made it anyway, because her grandfather had taught her that impossibility was just another word for something no one had tried hard enough to achieve. Tomorrow, Hollister would try to break her with his long-range test. He would set up targets at 1,500 meters and expect her to struggle. He did not know that 1,500 meters was less than half of what she had already done. But she could not show him. Not yet. Not until she understood why her file was classified so high that even a SEAL commander could not access it. Not until she figured out who was protecting her secrets and why. Ren reassembled her rifle in the darkness and made a decision. Tomorrow, she would be good. Good enough to pass. Good enough to stay in the program. But she would not be great. Not yet. She had learned patience in the mountains. She had learned that the perfect shot was not always the first shot or the fastest shot. Sometimes the perfect shot was the one you did not take until the moment was exactly right. Commander Hollister thought he was hunting her. He did not understand that she had been the hunter her entire life. And hunters knew how to wait. Across the compound, in the administrative building, Hollister sat at his desk with a phone pressed to his ear. His face was hard as granite. "I want to know what is in that file," he said. "I do not care what clearance level it requires. I do not care whose signature is on a classification order. That woman is in my program, and I will not be kept in the dark about who I am training." The voice on the other end said something that made his expression shift. "What do you mean she's not being trained?" Hollister leaned forward. "Then what exactly is she doing here?" The voice spoke again. Hollister's face went pale. He hung up the phone slowly and stared at the wall for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone again and dialed a different number. "Master Chief Rourke," he said, "I need you in my office. Now." He paused. "And bring everything we have on tomorrow's assessment. We need to make some changes." The line went dead. Somewhere in the darkness of the Naval Special Warfare compound, something had shifted. The game Hollister thought he was playing had just become something else entirely. And Ren Adebayo slept soundly in her quarters, dreaming of mountains and wind, and a single bullet traveling 2 miles through the thin air of a country that no longer remembered her name. The morning of the long-range assessment arrived with a fog that rolled in from the Pacific like a gray blanket being pulled over the world. Ren stood at the window of her quarters and watched it swallow the training grounds, erasing everything beyond 50 meters into a wall of nothing. Fog meant wind variables she could not see. Fog meant moisture that would affect bullet trajectory. Fog meant Hollister had chosen this day on purpose. She dressed in silence and reached for her rifle case. Her fingers found the latches and stopped. Something was wrong. The case was exactly where she had left it. The latches were closed exactly as she had closed them. But there was a weight to the air around it, a disturbance in the dust patterns on the surface that told her someone had been here. Someone had touched what was hers. Ren opened the case slowly. The rifle looked untouched. Stock, barrel, trigger assembly, all in their proper places. She lifted each component and examined it with the careful attention of someone who had learned that details were the difference between life and death. The scope. She held her grandfather's scope up to the gray light from the window and turned it slowly in her hands. At first, she saw nothing. Then she noticed the almost invisible scratch near the elevation turret. A scratch that had not been there last night. Someone had adjusted her scope. Someone had changed the calibration by just enough to throw off her shots without being obvious. At 500 meters, the difference would be negligible. At 1,500 meters, it would mean missing the target entirely. Ren set the scope down and felt something cold settle in her chest. This was not harassment. This was sabotage. Someone wanted her to fail badly enough to sneak into her quarters and tamper with her equipment. She thought about reporting it. She thought about marching to Commander Hollister's office and demanding an investigation. But she knew how that would play out. There would be denials. There would be accusations that she was making excuses before she had even failed. There would be smirks and knowing looks and whispered conversations about how the woman could not handle the pressure. No, she would handle this herself. Ren spent the next 20 minutes recalibrating the scope by hand. She did not have access to a proper zero range, so she worked from memory from the thousands of hours she had spent learning exactly how this piece of glass translated the world into distances and angles. When she finished, she was not certain the calibration was perfect, but it was close. Close enough. The candidates assembled at the long-range facility at 0700. The fog had begun to lift, but it still hung in patches across the firing range like ghosts that refused to leave. 41 candidates stood in formation. 6 more had rung the bell during the night, their spirits broken by the previous day's evolutions. Hollister stood at the front with Master Chief Rourke at his side. Both men wore expressions of anticipation. Today's assessment will test your ability to engage targets at extended ranges, Hollister announced. You will fire from 3 positions: 500 meters, 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters, 5 rounds at each distance. Minimum qualifying score is 12 hits out of 15. Someone in the formation let out a low whistle. 12 out of 15 at those distances was expert-level shooting. Most of the candidates were operators, not snipers. They trained for close-quarters combat, room-clearing, fast and violent action. This was a different kind of warfare entirely. Chief Adebayo, Ren stepped forward. Since you are our resident sniper instructor, you will demonstrate first. Show these candidates how it is done. Hollister's smile was thin as a blade. Unless you have some objection. No objection, Commander. She walked to the firing line and felt the weight of every eye on the range pressing against her back. The fog swirled around her boots as she settled into position. Prone, bipod deployed, stock pressed firmly into her shoulder. The 500-meter target appeared as a gray silhouette against the gray morning. Ren looked through her scope and made her calculations. Wind from the southwest at approximately 8 knots. Humidity high. Temperature cool. She adjusted for the conditions and placed her crosshairs on center mass. First shot. The rifle bucked against her shoulder and the round flew downrange. A moment later, the spotter called out the result. Hit. Center mass. She fired 4 more times. For more hits. The candidates behind her were silent. The 1,000-meter target was smaller, harder to see through the lingering fog. Ren felt the pressure building. This was where the sabotage scope would have begun to show its effects. This was where Hollister expected her to start missing. She made her adjustments. Breathed. Waited for the moment between heartbeats. 5 shots. 5 hits. The silence behind her had changed. It was no longer the silence of people watching someone fail. It was the silence of people watching something they did not quite understand. 1,500 meters. The target was barely visible, a dark smudge against a dark background, more than 9/10 of a mile away. At this distance, a bullet would take nearly 2 full seconds to reach its target. The wind could push it off course by feet, not inches. The margin for error was measured in fractions of fractions. Rin settled her breathing and felt the world narrow down to the small circle of her scope. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the mountains. She thought about the shot that had traveled more than twice this distance through air so thin that her lungs had ached with every breath. 1,500 meters was nothing. 1,500 meters was a warm-up, but she could not show them that. Not yet. She fired her first round and watched through the scope as it struck the target 2 inches left of center. A hit, but not a clean one. She adjusted slightly. Fired again. This time the round hit center mass. 3 more shots. 3 more hits. But she made sure each one was slightly off, slightly imperfect. Good enough to qualify. Not good enough to raise questions. When she stood up from the firing line, Hollister was staring at her with an expression she could not read. 15 for 15, he said slowly. Impressive, Chief. Thank you, Commander. She walked back to the formation and felt Micah's eyes on her. He had seen what the others had not. He had watched her hands, steady as stone, deliberately placing shots that should have been perfect into patterns that merely looked competent. He said nothing, but when she took her place beside him, he gave her a small nod that said he understood. The rest of the candidates took their turns. Most struggled at the longer distances. Some failed to qualify entirely. The big candidate who had harassed Micah on the first day, a man named Kershaw, missed 8 of his 15 shots and was placed on probationary status. As he walked back to the formation, his face burning with humiliation, he passed close to Ren. You think you are better than us, he hissed. You think that little shooting display makes you special. Ren did not respond. She kept her eyes forward and let his anger wash over her like water off stone. By the end of the assessment, 34 candidates remained qualified. 7 more had failed and would be given 1 chance to retest. The fog had burned off completely, and the California sun beat down on the range with the indifferent heat of a world that did not care about human struggles. Hollister dismissed the formation, but as Rin turned to leave, he called her name. Chief Adebayo. A moment. She stopped and faced him. The other candidates filed past, carefully not looking at her. That was adequate shooting, Hollister said when they were alone. For an instructor. Thank you, Commander. He stepped closer. His shadow fell across her like a threat. But I've been doing some research, Chief. Making some phone calls. And I'm starting to wonder if there is more to you than your service record suggests. Ren met his eyes without flinching. My service record is accurate, Commander. Your service record is incomplete. He leaned in slightly. I know there are files I cannot access. I know there are operations that do not officially exist. And I know that someone very high up the chain of command has taken a personal interest in keeping your secrets buried. With respect, Commander, if those files are classified above your clearance, there's probably a reason. Something flickered in Hollister's eyes. Anger, certainly, but something else too. Something that looked almost like fear. I will find out what you are hiding, he said quietly. And when I do, no amount of classified files will protect you from the truth. He turned and walked away, leaving Ren alone on the range with the distant targets still standing in their places, waiting for bullets that would never come. That evening, Ren sat in the common area with Micah and a handful of other candidates who had survived the day's assessment. The atmosphere was different now. The shooting exercise had changed something. The candidates who had dismissed her as a token presence were looking at her differently. A woman named Torres, a Navy lieutenant who had placed 3rd in the shooting assessment, sat down across from Ren. I spent 3 years training with some of the best marksmen in the fleet, Torres said. I have never seen anyone shoot like you did today. Ren shrugged. I had a good teacher. Torres studied her for a moment. You were holding back, were you not? At 1,500 meters, you could have put all 5 rounds through the same hole. Ren did not answer. Torres smiled slightly. I thought so. She leaned back in her chair. I do not know what your story is, Adebayo. but I'm starting to think it is a lot more interesting than any of us realized. She stood up and walked away. Micah waited until she was gone, then turned to Ren. She is right. You could have been perfect out there. Why were you not? Ren looked at the window where the last light of day was fading over the Pacific. Because perfection draws attention. And right now, attention is not what I need. Then what do you need? Time, Ren said. Time and answers. She stood up and walked back to her quarters. The hallway was empty, the other candidates either in the common area or already in their bunks. She reached her door and stopped. It was open, just a crack, but enough to tell her that someone had been inside again. Ren pushed the door open slowly and stepped into the darkness. Her quarters looked undisturbed. Her rack was made. Her gear was stowed. Everything in its proper place. But on her pillow, placed with deliberate care, was a single photograph. She picked it up and felt her blood turn to ice. The photograph showed a mountain range, snow-capped peaks against a pale sky, and in the foreground, circled in red marker, was a small figure lying prone on a rocky outcropping. It was her, Afghanistan, the day of the shot. Someone knew. Ren turned the photograph over. On the back, written in neat block letters, were 4 words. I know what happened. She stood in the darkness of her quarters, holding the photograph, and felt the careful wall she had built around her past beginning to crack. Someone on this base knew her secret, and they wanted her to know that they knew. Ren did not sleep that night. She sat in the darkness of her quarters with the photograph in her hands, studying every detail, searching for clues about who had taken it and why they had chosen now to reveal what they knew. The image was grainy, taken from a distance with a long telephoto lens. The kind of shot that required patience and planning. The kind of shot that required someone to know exactly where she would be and exactly when she would be there. This was not random. This was not intimidation from a fellow candidate. This was something else entirely. By the time the sun rose over Coronado, Ren had made a decision. She would not run. She would not hide. She would complete this program and force whoever was watching her to make their move. The morning formation felt different. The other candidates had heard about her shooting performance, and the hostility that had greeted her on the first day had been replaced by something more complicated. Respect, perhaps, or at least uncertainty. Hollister was not at the morning briefing. Master Chief Rourke stood alone at the front of the room, and his expression suggested that whatever was coming would not be pleasant. Change of plans, Rourke announced. Commander Hollister has been called away on urgent business. I will be running today's evolutions personally. He smiled, and Ren felt the temperature in the room drop. Today we will be conducting stress inoculation training. You will be pushed to your physical and mental limits. You will be tested in ways you have never been tested before. And those of you who cannot handle the pressure will have the opportunity to ring the bell and end your suffering. His eyes found Ren in the back of the room. Everyone will participate. No exceptions. The stress inoculation course was designed to simulate the chaos of combat. Explosions, smoke, disorienting lights and sounds. Physical obstacles that had to be navigated while instructors screamed in your face and threw obstacles in your path. Ren had been through similar training before. Scout Sniper School had its own version of Hell Week, and she had survived it. But Rourke had clearly tailored this particular course with her in mind. Every station seemed designed to exploit her size. Walls that were just high enough to make climbing difficult. Tunnels that were just narrow enough to trigger claustrophobia. Water obstacles that required brute strength to navigate. She pushed through anyway, muscle by muscle, breath by breath. When her arms gave out on the rope climb, she found reserves that she did not know she had. When the water threatened to pull her under, she kicked harder. When Rourke screamed in her face that she was worthless, that she did not belong, that she should quit and save everyone the embarrassment of watching her fail, she looked straight through him and kept moving. Micah struggled beside her. The young candidate was strong and fast, but the psychological pressure was getting to him. His movements were becoming erratic, his breathing ragged with panic. At the final obstacle, a mud pit that had to be low-crawled through while instructors sprayed water and threw smoke grenades, Micah froze. He was halfway through, his face inches from the churning mud, and his body simply stopped responding. Ren was already across. She had qualified. She could walk away and let him fail on his own. Instead, she dropped back into the mud. She crawled to where Micah lay frozen and put her mouth close to his ear. "You're not here," she said. "You're somewhere else. You are in a place where none of this matters. Think about that place. Think about why you came here. Think about the person you are trying to become." "I cannot," he whispered. "I cannot do this." "You already are. You're more than halfway through. The hardest part is behind you. All you have to do is keep moving forward." She grabbed his arm and pulled. Slowly, painfully, they began to crawl together through the mud. The instructor screamed louder. The smoke grew thicker, but Rin kept pulling, kept encouraging, kept refusing to let him quit. They emerged from the pit together, covered in mud from head to toe, gasping for air. Rourke stood over them with his clipboard and his cold eyes. "You went back for him," he said to Rin. "That cost you 30 seconds on your time. It was worth it." Rourke's jaw tightened. "Was it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you just demonstrated that you care more about being liked than about completing the mission." "From where I stand," Ren replied, "it looks like I just demonstrated that I do not leave people behind." Something dangerous flickered in Rourke's eyes. He leaned down until his face was inches from hers. "You think you're clever. You think your little performances and your perfect shooting and your inspirational speeches make you special. But I've been doing this for 15 years, and I know exactly what you are." Ren met his gaze without flinching. "And what is that, Master Chief?" "A liability." He straightened up. "A distraction. A political experiment that has no place in an operational unit. And I'm going to prove it." He turned and walked away, leaving them in the mud. That evening, Ren sat on the seawall behind the barracks and watched the sun sink into the Pacific. The photograph was in her pocket, a constant reminder that someone was watching, waiting, planning something she did not understand. Micah found her there. "You saved me today," he said, sitting down beside her. "I was done. I had given up, and you pulled me through. You would have found it yourself. I just reminded you it was there." He shook his head. "No, I would not have. I was ready to quit. I was ready to ring that bell and walk away from everything I've worked for. You're the only reason I'm still here." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the colors change across the sky. "Can I ask you something?" Micah said. "You can ask. Why are you really here? I mean, you were an instructor at one of the most prestigious sniper schools in the military. You had a career, a reputation. Why give all that up to come here and let people like Rourke treat you like dirt?" Ren considered the question. She thought about the classified files and the photograph on her pillow and the secrets that seemed to be unraveling around her. "Because sometimes you have to go through the fire to find out what you are really made of," she said. "And because there are things about myself that I need to prove. Not to them, to me." Micah nodded slowly. He did not fully understand, but he accepted it. "Whatever your reasons," he said, "I'm glad you are here. And I'm not the only one. Torres told me that half the candidates are starting to see you differently. They're starting to realize that maybe they had you wrong. The other half still want me to fail. Maybe. But the other half is shrinking every day." Ren almost smiled. Almost. The moment was shattered by the sound of boots on concrete. Master Chief Rourke appeared around the corner of the building, his face set in hard lines. "Chief Adebayo, stand up." Ren rose to her feet. "I just got off the phone with Commander Hollister. He has reviewed your performance in today's evolution, and he has some concerns." "What concerns?" Rourke stepped closer. "Concerns about your judgment. Concerns about your priorities. Concerns about whether you understand the difference between training and combat." "I understand the difference perfectly, Master Chief." "Do you?" "Because what I saw today was a candidate who abandoned her objective to assist a struggling teammate. In training, that looks like compassion. In combat, that looks like getting your entire team killed. In combat, I would never leave a team member behind." Rourke's expression shifted into something that looked almost like triumph. "That is exactly what I told the commander you would say. And he agrees with me that such an attitude represents a fundamental incompatibility with special operations doctrine." Ren felt something cold forming in her stomach. "What are you saying?" I am saying that Commander Hollister has authorized me to begin administrative separation proceedings. Rourke pulled a folded document from his pocket. You have until 0600 tomorrow to either ring the bell voluntarily or face a formal review board that will end your career. Micah stepped forward. You cannot do this. She passed every evolution. She qualified on every assessment. This is not about qualifications, Rourke said without looking at him. This is about suitability. And Chief Adebayo has demonstrated that she is not suitable for this program. He handed the document to Wren. 0600, he repeated. Ring the bell or face the board. Either way, you are finished here. He turned and walked into the darkness, leaving them alone with the sound of the waves and the weight of everything that had just been destroyed. Micah was shaking with anger. This is wrong. This is completely wrong. You have to fight this. Wren looked at the document in her hands. She looked at the deadline printed in bold letters. She looked at the signature at the bottom, Commander Drake Hollister's name scrawled in black ink like a death sentence. 0600. Less than 10 hours. Less than 10 hours to find a way to save everything she had worked for. She thought about the photograph. She thought about the classified files. She thought about Lieutenant Commander Shin and his questions about things he was not cleared to know. Someone on this base knew her secrets. Maybe it was time to find out who. Wren did not go to her quarters that night. She went to the one place on base where she thought she might find answers. The administrative building was dark except for a single light burning on the second floor. Lieutenant Commander Shin's office. She had gambled that he would still be working, and the gamble had paid off. She climbed the stairs and knocked on his door. Kumin. Shin looked up from his desk as she entered. His eyes registered surprise, then something that looked like resignation. Chief Adebayo, I was wondering when you would show up. You know about the separation proceedings. He nodded slowly. Rourke made sure everyone in the command structure knew within the hour. He is very proud of himself. Wren closed the door behind her. I need your help. Shin leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. Do you know what you are asking me to do? If I intervene on your behalf, I put my own career at risk. Hollister has powerful allies. People who have been waiting a long time for an excuse to push women out of special operations entirely. I know. Then why would I help you? Wren reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph. She placed it on his desk. Shin looked at the image. His face went pale. Where did you get this? Someone left it in my quarters. Someone who knows what I did in Afghanistan. Someone who wants me to know that they know. Shin picked up the photograph with hands that were not quite steady. This image is classified. The mission itself is classified. The fact that this photograph even exists means that someone with very high clearance has been watching you for a very long time. I know, Wren said again. And I think that same someone is the reason Hollister cannot access my file. I think someone is protecting me. But I do not know who, and I do not know why. Shin set the photograph down and looked at her with new eyes. When I requested additional access to your file, I was denied by someone at Joint Special Operations Command. Do you understand what that means? JSOC does not deny requests without reason. They do not protect people without purpose. Then help me figure out what that purpose is. Help me survive long enough to find out why someone thinks I am worth protecting. The silence stretched between them. Wren could hear the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore, the eternal rhythm of the Pacific marking time while her future hung in the balance. Finally, Shin spoke. There is one option. A technicality in the separation procedures that Rourke may not have considered. What is it? Any candidate facing administrative separation has the right to request a skills demonstration before a review board. If you can prove that your capabilities exceed the standard requirements, the board is obligated to take that into consideration before rendering a decision. Wren felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. What kind of demonstration? That is up to the board. But given that your alleged deficiency is judgment under pressure, I would expect them to design something that tests exactly that. They will design something impossible. Something meant to make me fail publicly. Almost certainly. Shin stood up and walked to the window. But here's the thing, Chief. I have read the portions of your file that I am clear to access. I have seen your instructor evaluations, your qualification scores, your performance reviews. and I have seen you shoot." He turned to face her. "I do not think they can design something you cannot beat. I think the only question is whether you are willing to show them what you really are." Rin thought about the years she had spent hiding, the deliberate mediocrity, the careful concealment of abilities that would have drawn attention she did not want. She thought about her grandfather's voice telling her that patience was its own kind of weapon. But patience had limits, and sometimes the only way forward was through. "I will request the demonstration," she said. Shin nodded. "I will make sure the request reaches the board before Rourke can bury it." "But Rin," he paused, using her first name for the first time, "whatever they design, whatever they throw at you, you need to understand something. If you fail, it will not just be your career that ends. It will be used as proof that women do not belong in special operations. Every female candidate who comes after you will carry the weight of your failure." "I understand. Do you? Because the pressure you have faced so far is nothing compared to what is coming." Rin met his eyes. "I have carried heavier weights than this. I have made shots that physics said were impossible. I have done things that will never appear in any official record because the people who ordered them done cannot admit they happened." She picked up the photograph from his desk. "Whoever is watching me, whoever left this in my quarters, they know what I am capable of. Maybe it is time everyone else found out, too." She left Shun's office and walked back to the barracks through the darkness. The fog had returned, wrapping the compound in gray silence. She felt like she was walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, where the rules of the world had stopped making sense. In her quarters, she sat on a rack and looked at her grandfather's scope. The scratches and worn spots that marked decades of use seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. She remembered the day he had given it to her. She had been 18 years old, about to leave for boot camp, terrified and trying not to show it. He had pressed the scope into her hands and told her the story of how he had carried it through the frozen hell of the chosen reservoir, how it had saved his life more times than he could count. "This scope has seen things no one should ever have to see," he had said. "It has been to the darkest places a person can go, but always brought me home, and now it will bring you home too." She had not understood what he meant then. She understood now. Home was not a place. Home was the person you became when everything else was stripped away. Home was the core of you that remained when the world had done its worst. Rin lay down on her rack with the scope clutched to her chest and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring the review board. Tomorrow would bring whatever impossible test they designed to destroy her. Tomorrow would bring the moment of truth that would determine everything that came after. But tonight, she allowed herself to remember. She remembered the mountains of Afghanistan, the thin air that made every breath feel like drowning, the cold that seeped into your bones and never quite left. She remembered lying on that rocky outcropping for 11 hours, waiting for a target that intelligence said would appear at a specific time in a specific place. She remembered the moment when everything had changed. The target had been a high-value individual, a man responsible for the deaths of dozens of American soldiers. A man who had eluded capture for years because he never appeared in the same place twice and never stayed anywhere long enough to be targeted. But intelligence had found pattern. A single point of vulnerability. A meeting that would take place in a valley more than 3 kilometers from the nearest viable shooting position. 3 kilometers. Nearly 2 miles. A shot that no one had ever made in combat conditions. They had sent her because she was the only one who had a chance. They had sent her because her grandfather had spent 20 years teaching her that impossible was just another word for something no one had tried hard enough to achieve. And she had made the shot. 3,247 meters. The bullet had traveled for nearly 4 seconds through air so thin that normal ballistic calculations did not apply. She had accounted for the rotation of the Earth. She had accounted for the temperature differential between her position and the target. She had accounted for wind patterns that changed 3 times during the bullet's flight. And she had watched through her grandfather's scope as the target fell. The mission had been classified immediately. The shot had been erased from official records. She had been given a medal in a ceremony that never happened and been told to never speak of it again. But someone remembered. Someone had been watching. Someone had taken a photograph that should not exist. Ren opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling of her quarters. Tomorrow, they would try to break her. Tomorrow, they would design something meant to prove that she did not belong. But she had already done the impossible once. She could do it again. The review board convened at 0800 in the main briefing room. Commander Hollister sat at the center of a long table flanked by Master Chief Rourke and two officers Ren did not recognize. Lieutenant Commander Shun sat at the end, his face carefully neutral. Chief Petty Officer Adebayo, Hollister began, "You have requested a skills demonstration in lieu of standard separation proceedings. Is that correct?" "Yes, Commander." "And you understand that the board will design the parameters of this demonstration?" "Yes, Commander." Hollister glanced at Rourke, and something passed between them. A look of anticipation. A look of triumph already forming. "Very well. The board has determined that your demonstration will consist of a single task." He slid a folder across the table. "You will complete the combat stress course under live fire conditions. Simulated enemy combatants will engage you with marking rounds throughout the course. You will be required to neutralize 6 designated targets at distances ranging from 200 to 800 meters while under continuous hostile fire. You will have a time limit of 15 minutes. Ren opened the folder and studied the course layout. It was brutal. The shooting positions were exposed. The target distances were extreme for a combat scenario. The time limit was barely adequate for the physical demands, let alone the precision shooting. And one more thing, Hollister added. To ensure that this demonstration accurately tests your judgment under pressure, you will not be permitted to use your personal weapon. You will use a standard-issue rifle selected by the board. Ren looked up. A rifle she had never fired. A scope she had never calibrated. Equipment she had no familiarity with. Hollister was smiling. For the first time since she had arrived at Coronado, Commander Drake Hollister was genuinely smiling. "Do you accept these conditions, Chief Adebayo?" The room was silent. Every eye was on her. She could feel the weight of expectation, the certainty in Hollister's expression that she would fail, the barely concealed triumph in Rourke's posture. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the mountains. She thought about the photograph and the secrets and the unknown ally who had been watching her from the shadows. "Yes, Commander," she said. "I accept." Hollister's smile widened. "The demonstration begins in 1 hour." Dismissed. The combat stress course stretched out before her like a gauntlet designed by someone who wanted to watch her bleed. Concrete barriers. Exposed shooting positions. Kill zones that offered no cover and no concealment. And somewhere in a maze, 6 targets waiting to be neutralized by a woman using a rifle she had never touched before. Ren stood at the starting line and felt the weight of the unfamiliar weapon in her hands. It was a standard M4 carbine with an ACOG scope, well-maintained but generic. The kind of rifle that thousands of soldiers carried into combat every day. The kind of rifle that was accurate enough for most situations, but lacked the precision she had spent her life mastering. She had 45 minutes before the demonstration began. 45 minutes to learn the personality of a weapon that was not hers. 45 minutes to calibrate her instincts to a scope that might be off by fractions of degrees that would translate to inches of distance. She found a quiet corner of the range and began to work. Every rifle had a soul. Her grandfather had taught her that. Every weapon had quirks and tendencies, preferences and resistances. The key to mastery was not forcing the rifle to do what you wanted. The key was learning what the rifle wanted to do and working with it instead of against it. She fired 20 rounds at 100 meters and studied the groupings. The rifle pulled slightly left. The trigger had a longer reset than she was used to. The scope was calibrated adequately, but not precisely. She adjusted, adapted, learned. By the time the demonstration began, she knew this rifle as well as she could know anything in 45 minutes. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was what she had. The starting horn sounded. Ren exploded from the line and immediately came under fire. The marking rounds snapped past her head, close enough to feel the displaced air. The simulated enemy combatants were not pulling their punches. They were shooting to hit. She dove behind the first concrete barrier and assessed the course ahead. The first target was visible at 200 meters, partially obscured by a wooden structure. She had maybe 3 seconds before the flanking fire forced her to move. She rose, acquired the target, and fired. The round struck center mass. One down. The next 10 minutes were a blur of motion and violence. She moved from cover to cover, taking fire from multiple directions, returning fire when she could, always pushing forward toward the next target. Her lungs burned. Her muscles screamed. The unfamiliar rifle fought her on every shot, its quirks and imperfections magnified by the chaos of simulated combat. Target 2 fell at 350 meters. A difficult shot made harder by the marking rounds impacting around her position. Target 3 was hidden behind a vehicle at 400 meters. She had to expose herself completely to take the shot. A marking round caught her in the shoulder as she fired, the impact hard enough to leave a bruise that would last for weeks. But the target went down. Halfway through. 3 targets remaining. 7 minutes left. The 4th target was the trap. She saw it immediately. It was positioned at 500 meters with no viable cover between her current position and the shooting point. To engage it, she would have to cross 50 meters of open ground under continuous fire. This was where they expected her to fail. This was where they expected her to hesitate, to make a mistake, to prove that she did not belong. Rin did not hesitate. She burst from cover and ran. The marking rounds came in waves, a storm of simulated death that tracked her across the open ground. She felt impacts on her legs, her back, her arms. Each one was a failure. Each one was proof that in real combat, she would be dying right now. But she kept running. She reached the shooting position and dropped prone in a single fluid motion. The target wavered in her scope, 500 meters of uncertainty between her and success. She controlled her breathing, controlled her heartbeat, controlled everything except the chaos erupting around her. She fired. The target fell. For down. 2 remaining. For minutes left. The 5th target was at 650 meters. The 6th was at 800. Both were beyond the effective range of the standard M4 in any normal circumstance. Both required shots that pushed the weapon past its design parameters. Rin moved to the final shooting position and felt the weight of impossibility settling onto her shoulders. 800 meters with an M4. It was not a shot anyone was supposed to make. It was not a shot the rifle was built for. But she was not anyone, and she had made shots that were far more impossible than this. She engaged the 5th target first. 650 meters. The round flew true, and the target dropped. 1 minute 30 seconds remaining. The 6th target appeared at 800 meters. A small silhouette against a distant backdrop, barely visible through the smoke and chaos of the course. The marking rounds were still coming. Her body was battered and bruised. Her arms were shaking from exhaustion. Rin looked through the scope and saw not a target but a test. A final examination of everything she had ever learned, everything she had ever been, everything she had ever sacrificed to become the person lying in the dirt at this moment. She thought about her grandfather. She thought about the mountains. She thought about 3,247 meters of thin air and the single bullet that had changed everything. 800 meters was nothing. She fired. The round left the barrel and began its journey through the smoke-filled air. It traveled for what seemed like an eternity, crossing distance that the rifle had never been designed to cross. The target fell. The horn sounded. The simulation ended. The marking round stopped. Rin lay in the dirt for a long moment, breathing, existing, processing what had just happened. Then she pushed herself to her feet and turned to face the observation platform where the review board had watched her demonstration. Hollister's face was unreadable. Rourke looked like he had swallowed something bitter. The 2 officers Rin did not recognize were conferring in whispered tones. But it was Shun's expression that caught her attention. He was staring at her with something that looked like awe and something that looked like fear. The board reconvened in the briefing room 30 minutes later. Rin stood at attention, her body aching, her uniform stained with dirt and the paint from dozens of marking round impacts. Hollister spoke first. Chief Adebayo, you completed the course in 14 minutes and 23 seconds. You neutralized all 6 targets. You sustained simulated casualties that would have been fatal in actual combat. He paused. However, the purpose of this demonstration was to assess your judgment under pressure, not your marksmanship. And the board has determined that your performance, while technically successful, raises serious questions about your tactical decision-making. Rin felt something cold forming in her stomach. They were going to fail her anyway. Despite everything she had done, they were going to find a reason to push her out. Commander, everyone turned to look at Shun. With respect, I believe the board should consider additional factors before rendering a decision. Hollister's eyes narrowed. What factors, Lieutenant Commander? Shun hesitated. Rin could see him weighing his career against something else, something that mattered more than promotions and politics. I have reason to believe that Chief Adebayo's service record contains classified information relevant to this evaluation. Information that would significantly impact the board's understanding of her capabilities. The room went silent. What kind of information? Hollister asked slowly. The kind that explains how she just made an 8-ton shot with a standard issue M4 under combat conditions. Shun's voice was steady, but Rin could see his hands trembling slightly. The kind that suggests she is not just a sniper instructor, Commander. She may be the most accomplished long-range shooter in. That is enough, Lieutenant Commander. Hollister's voice cut through the room like a blade. You are treading into areas that are not your concern. With respect, Commander, if they are classified elements of her record that bear on this evaluation, they should be. I said enough. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. Rin watched Hollister's face and saw something change in his expression. The anger was still there, but beneath it was something new. Curiosity. Hunger. The look of a man who had just discovered that his prey was more interesting than he had realized. This board is recessed, Hollister announced. We will reconvene tomorrow morning to render a final decision. Chief Adebayo, you're confined to quarters until further notice. He stood and walked out without looking at her. Rourke followed, but not before shooting Rin a glare that promised this was far from over. Shin approached her as the room emptied. I am sorry, he said quietly. I should not have said anything. I may have made things worse. Why did you? Because what you did out there was impossible. And impossible things deserve explanations. He glanced toward the door where Hollister had disappeared. But now he knows there is something to find. He will not stop until he discovers what it is. Rin nodded slowly. Then I suppose we had better make sure he finds it on our terms instead of his. Shin studied her face. You have a plan? Not yet, but I will. She walked back to her quarters through the fading afternoon light. The compound was quiet, the other candidates either in training or recovering from the day's evolutions. She felt eyes on her as she moved, felt the weight of attention from people who had watched her demonstration and were now wondering exactly who she was. In her quarters, she found Micah waiting outside her door. I heard what happened, he said. The whole base is talking about it. They're saying you made shots that should not have been possible. People say a lot of things. Is it true? Is there something in your file that explains how you can do what you do? Rin looked at him for a long moment. She thought about secrets and trust and the weight of carrying things alone for too long. Yes, she said finally. There's something. What is it? Before she could answer, her door opened from the inside. She had not left it unlocked. Standing in her quarters, holding her grandfather's scope in his hands, was Commander Drake Hollister. I made some calls, he said. Called in some favors. Pushed some buttons that I probably should not have pushed. He set the scope down carefully. 3,247 meters. A shot that the physics say is nearly impossible. A target that officially never existed. His eyes locked onto hers. You're not a sniper instructor, Chief Adebayo. You are the most lethal long-range shooter in the history of the United States military. He stepped closer. And now I want to know why someone has gone to such extraordinary lengths to keep that a secret. Rin stood frozen in the doorway of her own quarters, watching Commander Hollister handle her grandfather's scope with hands that had no right to touch it. Put that down. Hollister looked up at her, and for the first time since she had arrived at Coronado, his expression held something other than contempt. It held fascination. 3,247 meters, he repeated. Do you have any idea what that means? The current official record is held by a Canadian Special Forces sniper. 3,540 meters. But that shot was taken with a Macmillan TAC-50, one of the most advanced long-range rifles ever built. He set the scope down carefully on her desk. Your shot was taken with a modified M82, a weapon that was never designed for that kind of distance. And you made it in combat conditions at altitude with wind variables that would have defeated any other shooter on the planet. Ren stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Micah remained in the hallway, uncertain, watching through the gap until the door clicked shut. How did you get that information? She asked. I told you. I made calls. I pushed buttons. Hollister moved to the window and looked out at the darkening sky. The classification on your file goes all the way to the top. Joint Special Operations Command. The Director of National Intelligence. There are people in Washington who have gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure that shot never becomes public knowledge. Then maybe you should have respected that classification. Hollister turned to face her. Maybe I should have. But you are my program, Chief. You are my responsibility. And I do not accept responsibility for people I do not understand. You do not need to understand me. You just need to evaluate whether I can do the job. Something shifted in Hollister's expression. The fascination was still there, but it was joined now by something else. Something that looked almost like uncertainty. Why did they send you here? He asked. The real reason. Not the official paperwork about joint operations programs and experimental integration. Why would someone with your abilities be assigned to a basic selection course? Ren considered her answer carefully. The truth was that she did not know. She had asked herself that question 100 times since receiving her orders, and she had never found a satisfactory answer. I do not know, she admitted. I was told this was an opportunity, a chance to prove that women could succeed in special operations. I believed it because I wanted to believe it. And now I think someone wanted me here for reasons that have nothing to do with gender integration. Hollister nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. The photograph, he said, the one that was left in your quarters. I did not send it. Neither did Rourke. I know. How? Because you did not know about my record until today. Whoever left that photograph knew about it long before you did. The silence stretched between them, filled with questions neither of them could answer. I need to know what happened in Afghanistan, Hollister said finally. Not the classified version. Not the sanitized summary. I need to know what really happened on that mountain. Ren walked to her desk and picked up her grandfather's scope. She held it in her hands and felt the weight of memory pressing down on her. Why should I tell you anything? Because I'm starting to think that whoever sent you here and whoever is watching you and whoever classified your record are not the same people. Hollister's voice was quieter now, stripped of its usual authority. And because I'm starting to think that you are in more danger than either of us realized. Ren looked at the scope and remembered. The mission was called Operation Silent Peak, she began. It officially never happened. The target was a man named Ahmad Rashid. He was responsible for coordinating IED attacks that had killed 43 American soldiers over 18 months. Intelligence had been trying to locate him for years, but he never stayed in one place long enough to be targeted. She sat down on her rack, the scope still cradled in her hands. They found a pattern, a single point of vulnerability. Rashid met with his lieutenants once every 3 months in a valley in the Hindu Kush. The meeting location changed each time, but the timing was consistent. Intelligence predicted the next meeting with 70% confidence. Where did you come in? The valley was surrounded by mountains. The nearest viable shooting position was more than 3 kilometers from the meeting site. Every sniper they consulted said the shot was impossible. The distance was too great. The altitude was too high. The wind patterns were too unpredictable. But you took the shot anyway. Ren closed her eyes and let herself remember. The cold. The thin air that made every breath feel like drowning. The 11 hours of lying motionless on a rocky outcropping, waiting for a target that might never appear. I was the only one who said I could make it. My commanding officer thought I was arrogant. My spotter thought I was insane. But I knew my grandfather's scope. I knew my rifle. And I knew that impossible was just a word people used when they were afraid to try. She opened her eyes and looked at Hollister. I lay on that mountain for 11 hours. The temperature dropped to 15 below zero. My fingers went numb. My spotter wanted to abort 3 times, but I refused. And then, at 14:37 local time, Ahmad Rashid walked into that valley with 6 of his lieutenants. Hollister was completely still, his attention focused on her with an intensity that bordered on uncomfortable. The wind was variable, 8 to 12 knots, shifting direction every few seconds. The altitude meant the air density was 40% lower than sea level. Normal ballistic calculations did not apply. I had to account for factors that most snipers never even consider. How long did you wait? 93 seconds. I watched him through my scope for 93 seconds, calculating, adjusting, waiting for the moment when all the variables aligned. And then I took the shot. The silence that followed was profound. Rin could hear her own heartbeat, slow and steady, the same rhythm it had kept on that mountain 3 years ago. The bullet traveled for 3.8 seconds. It crossed 3,247 meters of mountain air. It dropped nearly 200 feet during its flight, and it struck Ahmad Rashid in the center of his chest, exactly where I aimed it. She looked down at her grandfather's scope. I watched him fall. I watched his lieutenants scatter, and then I extracted with my spotter and never spoke of it again. Until now. Hollister exhaled slowly, like a man releasing pressure that had built up over years. That shot should have made you famous. It should have made you a legend. Why would anyone want to keep it secret? I do not know. I asked the same question after the mission. I was told that the political implications were too sensitive, that acknowledging the kill would create diplomatic problems with allies in the region, that it was better for everyone if the shot simply never happened. And you accepted that? I was a soldier. I followed orders. But you do not believe it anymore. Rin shook her head. No, I think there is something else. Something I was never told. And I think whoever sent me here wanted me to find out what it is. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rin opened it to find Micah standing in the hallway, his face pale with urgency. You need to come, he said. Something has happened. Torres found something in the training records. Something about tomorrow's evaluation. Hollister stepped forward. What kind of something? Micah looked between them, uncertain whether to speak freely in front of the commander. Rin nodded slightly. The final evaluation, Micah said, is not a standard assessment. Torres hacked into the training database and found the real parameters. They are bringing in a Barrett M82. They are setting up a target at extreme range. He swallowed hard. They want you to recreate the shot. The Afghanistan shot. 3,247 meters. And they are betting everything that you cannot do it twice. Rin felt the world narrow down to a single point of focus. Someone had designed this test. Someone who knew exactly what she had done and exactly how to challenge her to do it again. Who authorized this? Hollister demanded. Micah shook his head. The authorization came from outside the normal chain of command. Torres could not trace it any higher than JSOC. Hollister's face hardened. JSOC. The same people who classified your record. The same people who might be watching me, Rin added. The same people who might have sent me here for exactly this purpose. She looked at the scope in her hands. Her grandfather's scope. The scope that had traveled through the frozen hell of Korea and the thin air of Afghanistan and had somehow ended up here, in this moment, pointing toward another impossible shot. What are you going to do? Micah asked. Rin set the scope down on her desk and turned to face both men. I'm going to take the shot, she said. I'm going to prove that what I did in Afghanistan was not luck and was not a fluke and was not a one-time miracle. I'm going to show them exactly what I am capable of. She looked at Hollister. And then I'm going to find out who has been pulling the strings. And I'm going to make them explain why they chose me for this game. Hollister studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Get some rest, Chief. Tomorrow is going to change everything. He left without another word. Micah lingered in the doorway. Can you really do it? He asked quietly. Can you really make that shot again? Rin picked up her grandfather's scope and held it up to the light. I made it once when no one believed I could. I made it with numb fingers and frozen lungs and 11 hours of waiting behind me. She looked at Micah and smiled for the first time in days. Tomorrow I will be warm and rested and ready. Tomorrow I will show them what impossible really looks like. The night before the final evaluation, Rin did not sleep. She sat in her quarters with her grandfather's scope disassembled on the desk in front of her, cleaning each component with the meticulous care of a surgeon preparing for an operation that would determine whether a patient lived or died. The scope had seen so much. Corel, Vietnam, countless training ranges across Montana, where a young girl had learned that the distance between impossible and inevitable was nothing more than patience and precision. She thought about her grandfather's hands, weathered and steady, guiding her own as she learned to read the wind and feel the weight of a trigger and understand that a bullet was not just a piece of metal, but an extension of will. "You are not shooting at a target, little bird," he had told her once. "You are reaching out across the distance and touching something that does not want to be touched. The bullet is just how you say hello." She reassembled the scope in the darkness and felt the familiar click of each component settling into place. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would face it with this piece of her grandfather's legacy mounted on her rifle. She would carry him with her into whatever came next. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Lieutenant Commander Shin standing in the hallway with a folder in his hands. "I thought you should see this before tomorrow," he said quietly. Rin stepped aside and let him enter. He placed the folder on her desk and opened it to reveal a series of photographs and documents. "I've been doing some digging," Shin explained. "Off the books. Using contacts I probably should not have used. And I found something that changes everything." Rin looked at the first photograph. It showed a man in civilian clothes standing outside a nondescript building in what looked like Washington, D.C. The man's face was partially obscured, but something about his posture seemed familiar. Who is he? His name is Colonel Marcus Webb. Officially, he is a liaison officer attached to the Joint Special Operations Command. Unofficially, he runs a program called Project Longshot. Rin felt a chill run down her spine. What is Project Longshot? It is a classified initiative designed to identify and develop exceptional long-range shooters for missions that cannot be officially acknowledged. Shin pointed to another photograph. "Webb has been tracking your career since you were 17 years old. He was the one who recommended you for Scout Sniper School. He was the one who arranged for you to be assigned to Afghanistan. And he was the one who classified your record after the Rashid kill." Rin stared at the photographs. 17 years old. Before she had even enlisted, before she had known that the military would become her life. Why would he do that? Why would he track me for so long? "Because you are not just a talented sniper, Rin." Shin's voice was heavy with something that sounded like regret. "You are the product of a program that has been developing shooters like you for decades. Your grandfather was part of it. The skills he taught you were not random. They were part of a curriculum designed to produce exactly what you became." The words hit her like physical blows. Her grandfather, the man who had raised her after her parents died, the man who had taught her everything she knew about patience and precision and the art of the impossible shot. He had been part of something larger, something she had never known about. "My grandfather died 3 years ago," she said slowly, "just before the Afghanistan mission." "I know." Shin pulled out another document. Colonel Webb visited him in the hospital 2 weeks before he passed. There is no record of what they discussed, but 1 week later, you received orders for Operation Silent Peak. Rin sat down heavily on a rack. The scope that had been her grandfather's legacy suddenly felt different in her hands. Not just a gift from a man who loved her, but a tool that had been placed in her hands by people who had been planning her future since before she could remember. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because tomorrow's evaluation is not just a test." Shin closed the folder. "It is an audition. Webb will be watching. He has been waiting to see if you can recreate the Rashid shot under control conditions. If you succeed, you will be recruited into Project Longshot. If you fail, you will be discarded like every other candidate who did not meet their standards. And if I refuse to participate?" Shin was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "I do not think refusal is an option they have considered. These people have invested too much in you to let you walk away. He stood and moved toward the door. I am sorry, Ren. I thought you deserved to know the truth before tomorrow. Whatever you decide to do with this information is up to you. He left her alone with the folder and the scope and the weight of revelations that threatened to crush everything she thought she knew about her life. Ren spent the remaining hours of darkness reading through the documents Sean had provided. Each page revealed another layer of the program that had shaped her without her knowledge. Training protocols disguised as hunting trips. Evaluations hidden within marksmanship competitions. A lifetime of preparation for a destiny she had never chosen. But as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through her window, she realized something important. The skills were hers. The patience was hers. The discipline and determination and the ability to reach across impossible distances were hers. Whatever program had tried to shape her, whatever shadowy figures had manipulated her path, they had not created who she was. Her grandfather had loved her. She was certain of that. Whatever else he had been part of, whatever secrets he had kept, the man who had taught her to shoot and to wait and to believe in herself had done so out of love. And the woman she had become was her own creation. The morning formation assembled at 0600. 31 candidates remained from the original 47. They stood in neat rows on the grinder, breath misting in the cool air, waiting for whatever final challenge would determine their futures. Commander Hollister emerged from the training building with Master Chief Rourke at his side. But they were not alone. Behind them, four sailors carried a large black case that Ren recognized immediately. The case was over 5 feet long and bore the markings of a specialized weapon system, the Barrett M82A1, 50 caliber, the rifle that had accompanied her to the mountains of Afghanistan. Candidates, Hollister announced, today marks the final evaluation of this selection cycle. For most of you, this will consist of standard assessments of the skills you have developed over the past weeks. He paused, and his eyes found Ren in the formation. For one candidate, however, we have prepared a special evaluation, an evaluation designed to test capabilities that go beyond the standard curriculum. He gestured, and the sailors set down the case at the front of the formation. Rourke stepped forward and opened it, revealing the massive rifle nestled in foam padding. Chief Petty Officer Adebayo, Hollister continued, please step forward. Ren moved to the front of the formation. She could feel the eyes of every candidate on her back, could sense their confusion and curiosity. You have claimed exceptional skills in long-range precision shooting, Hollister said. Today, you will have the opportunity to demonstrate those skills. He pointed toward the distant hills beyond the training compound. A target has been established at a distance of 3,247 meters. You will have 1 hour to prepare and 1 shot to prove yourself. Murmurs rippled through the formation. 3,247 meters. Nearly 2 miles. A distance that most of the candidates had never even considered, let alone attempted. Ren looked at the Barrett in its case. She looked at Hollister's face, searching for some sign of what he was thinking. She looked past him to where a black SUV had parked at the edge of the compound, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. Colonel Webb, watching, waiting, ready to judge whether his investment had paid off. She thought about refusing. She thought about walking away from this program and these people and the future they had planned for her without her consent. But then she thought about her grandfather. She thought about the scope he had given her. She thought about all the hours they had spent together on the ranges of Montana, learning that impossible was just another word for something worth attempting. She had made this shot once before. She had made it in the cold and the wind and the chaos of a combat zone. She could make it again. Ren stepped forward and knelt beside the case. She ran her hands over the Barrett's familiar contours and felt the weight of everything she was about to do settling onto her shoulders. 1 shot. 1 moment, 1 chance to prove that she was more than a product of someone else's program. She looked up at Hollister. I will need my grandfather's scope, she said. Something flickered in Hollister's expression. He reached into his jacket and produced the scope she had thought was still in her quarters. I had a feeling you would say that. He handed it to her, and their eyes met for a moment that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of ordinary time. "Show them what you can do," he said quietly. "Show them all." Rin took the scope and felt its familiar weight in her hands. Then she began to prepare for the shot that would change everything. The shooting position had been established on a ridge overlooking the Pacific. From here, Rin could see the target in the distance, a small steel silhouette planted on a hillside nearly 2 miles away. Between her and the target lay a valley filled with wind currents that would push and pull at her bullet like invisible hands trying to knock it off course. She had 1 hour to prepare. 1 hour to calculate variables that would determine whether her shot flew true or vanished into the empty air of failure. Ren began by studying the terrain. The valley created a natural wind tunnel, channeling air currents from the ocean inland. But the currents were not consistent. They shifted and swirled, changing direction and intensity in patterns that seemed random, but were actually governed by the complex physics of temperature differentials and geographic features. She pulled out the small notebook she always carried and began making calculations. Distance, elevation change, air density, humidity, the rotation of the Earth, which at this distance would push her bullet several inches to the right. The other candidates had been dismissed to their standard evaluations, but a small crowd had gathered at the observation point behind her position. Hollister was there, Rourke, Shun, Torres and Micah, and a dozen others who had heard about what was happening and wanted to witness it for themselves. And in the black SUV at the edge of the compound, Colonel Webb watched through tinted glass. Wren ignored them all. She had learned long ago that the crowd did not matter. The pressure did not matter. The only things that mattered were the rifle and the target and the invisible path between them. She mounted her grandfather's scope on the Barrett and began the process of zeroing the weapon. The rifle was well-maintained, but unfamiliar, and she needed to understand its personality before she could trust it with a shot of this magnitude. She fired 3 rounds at a 1,000-meter target to establish a baseline. The grouping was tight, but slightly left. She adjusted the scope and fired again. This time the rounds clustered within an inch of center. 45 minutes remaining. Rin moved to a secondary position and engaged a target at 1,500 meters. The Barrett roared with each shot, its massive recoil absorbed by the hydraulic buffer system, but still powerful enough to shake the earth beneath her. 3 shots. 3 hits. The rifle was performing as expected. 30 minutes remaining. She returned to the primary shooting position and settled into her stance. Prone, bipod deployed, stock pressed firmly into her shoulder. The target wavered in her scope, a tiny speck of steel floating in a sea of brown hillside. 3,247 meters. She began her final calculations. The wind had shifted since she started her preparation. It was now coming from the southwest at approximately 12 knots, but gusting to 18 at irregular intervals. The temperature had risen 3 degrees, which would affect air density. A thin layer of clouds had moved in from the ocean, changing the light conditions. In Afghanistan, she had made this shot with frozen fingers and thin air and 11 hours of exhaustion weighing on her body. Today she was warm and rested and surrounded by people who wanted to see her succeed or fail. The pressure was different, but the shot was the same. 20 minutes remaining. Rin closed her eyes and let herself feel the wind on her face. She listened to the rhythm of the gusts, counting the seconds between peaks and valleys. 8 seconds. 12 seconds. 7 seconds. The pattern was irregular, but not random. There was a cycle buried in the chaos, a moment of relative calm that repeated every 30 to 40 seconds. That would be her window, that brief moment when the wind held its breath. 15 minutes remaining. She opened her eyes and looked through the scope. The target seemed impossibly small, impossibly far. A normal shooter would see only distance and doubt. But Rin saw something else. She saw the path her bullet would travel. She saw the invisible forces that would try to push it off course. She saw the exact point where she needed to aim to account for all the variables that stood between her and success. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. The bullet will find its target. Your only job is to wait for the moment when waiting is no longer necessary. 10 minutes remaining. A commotion behind her broke her concentration. She turned to see a figure approaching the shooting position. A man in civilian clothes with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades giving orders. Colonel Marcus Webb stopped at the edge of her position and looked down at her with eyes that held no warmth. "Chief Adebayo," he said, "we finally meet." Wren did not rise from her position. She kept her hands on the rifle and her eyes on his face. "I know who you are. I know what Project Longshot is. I know you've been watching me since I was 17 years old." Webb nodded slowly. "Then you know why this moment matters. You are the culmination of decades of research and development. The finest long-range shooter we have ever produced. This shot will prove whether our investment was worthwhile. I am not your investment. I am not your product." Wren's voice was steady despite the anger burning in her chest. "Whatever you think you created, I made myself. My grandfather taught me. My own discipline shaped me. You just watched from the shadows and took credit for work that was never yours." Something flickered in Webb's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "Your grandfather was one of our founding members," he said quietly. "He believed in the program. He believed in you. He believed in me. Not in your program. Not in your plans. In me." Webb studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped back. "Show me," he said. "Show me what you believe in." He walked back to the observation point, leaving her alone with the rifle and the target and the weight of everything she was about to prove. 5 minutes remaining. Wren settled back into her position and pushed everything else out of her mind. Webb did not matter. The program did not matter. The crowd watching from behind did not matter. Only the shot mattered. She watched the wind through her scope, counting the gusts, waiting for the pattern to reveal itself. 12 seconds. 9 seconds. 14 seconds. The cycle was approaching its calm point. In approximately 2 minutes, there would be a window of 6 to 8 seconds when the wind would drop to its lowest intensity. That was her moment. 3 minutes remaining. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heartbeat, let her body become perfectly still, a platform of flesh and bone designed for a single purpose. 2 minutes remaining. The wind gusted hard from the southwest, pushing against her body like an invisible hand. She waited. The gust faded. Another came. She waited. The pattern was reaching its peak. 1 minute remaining. The final gust came and went. The wind began to die. Wren placed her finger on the trigger and felt the weight of the pull. 3.5 pounds. The Barrett's trigger was heavier than she preferred, but she had accounted for that in her preparation. 30 seconds remaining. She looked through her grandfather's scope and saw the target floating in the crosshairs. She saw the hillside behind it. She saw the path her bullet would travel. She saw everything. 15 seconds remaining. The wind dropped to 8 knots. Then 6. Then 4. The calm had arrived. Wren exhaled slowly, emptying her lungs, letting her body settle into perfect stillness. She found the space between heartbeats. She began to squeeze the trigger, and then the wind shifted. It came from nowhere, a sudden gust from the northeast that had not been part of any pattern she had observed. 12 knots. 15. 20. The strongest wind she had felt all morning, coming from a direction that changed every calculation she had made. Behind her, she heard someone gasp. She heard Rourke laugh, a sharp bark of triumph at her impending failure. The old Wren would have stopped. The old Wren would have waited for the wind to settle, would have recalculated, would have played it safe. But she was not the old Wren. She was the woman who had made an impossible shot in the mountains of Afghanistan. She was the woman who had survived everything this program had thrown at her. She was the woman who had learned that impossible was just another word for something worth attempting. In a fraction of a second before the trigger broke, she adjusted. She shifted her aim point by instinct, by feel, by the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime spent learning to read the wind. The rifle roared. The bullet left the barrel and began its journey across 3,247 meters of wind-torn air. And Wren watched through her grandfather's scope as everything she had ever worked for flew toward its target. 3.8 seconds. That was how long the bullet traveled through the air. 3.8 seconds of metal and physics and hope, crossing a distance that most people could not even comprehend. Ren watched through her grandfather's scope as the bullet flew. She could not see it, of course. No one could see a bullet moving at that speed. But she could feel it. She could sense its path through the wind-torn air, could imagine the invisible forces pushing against it, trying to knock it off course. The wind gust that had disrupted her shot was still blowing, 20 knots from the northeast, shoving her bullet sideways with every meter it traveled. Her instinctive adjustment had been calculated in a fraction of a second, a lifetime of training compressed into a single moment of intuition. Had it been enough? The target stood motionless on the distant hillside, a steel silhouette the size of a human torso, painted bright orange to be visible at extreme range. Through her scope, it looked like nothing more than a speck of color against the brown terrain. 3.8 seconds. The bullet reached its target. The steel silhouette rocked backward on its stand, the unmistakable motion of a solid hit. A moment later, the sound of the impact reached the observation point, a distant clang that echoed across the valley like a bell announcing a victory. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The crowd at the observation point stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Then Micah's voice broke the silence. She hit it. His words came out as barely more than a whisper. She actually hit it. The dam broke. Candidates who had spent weeks watching Ren endure harassment and sabotage and impossible challenges surged forward with shouts of disbelief and celebration. Torres was the first to reach her, pulling her up from the shooting position and wrapping her in a fierce embrace. "That was the most incredible thing I have ever seen," Torres said. 2 miles. In that wind. How is that even possible? Ren did not answer immediately. She was still processing the moment, still feeling the echo of the shot in her bones. She looked down at her grandfather's scope and felt tears threatening to form in her eyes. She had done it. She had proven that the Afghanistan shot was not a fluke, not luck, not a one-time miracle. She had proven that she was exactly what she had always known herself to be. The crowd parted as Commander Hollister approached. His face was unreadable, but something had changed in his posture. The rigid hostility that had defined his interactions with her was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. 3,247 meters, he said slowly. In variable wind conditions. With a rifle you had never fired before today. He stopped in front of her and met her eyes. I have been in special operations for 20 years. I have worked with the finest shooters in the world. I have never seen anything like what you just did. Ren held his gaze. Does that mean I passed the evaluation? A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of Hollister's mouth. Chief Adebayo, I think we both know that this evaluation was never about whether you could pass. It was about whether you would reveal what you are capable of. He glanced toward the black SUV, where Colonel Webb was emerging from the vehicle. And now that you have, everything changes. Webb approached the group with the measured stride of a man who is accustomed to being the most important person in any room. The candidates fell silent as he drew near, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Chief Adebayo, Webb said, that was an impressive demonstration. I was not demonstrating for you. Webb's expression did not change. Nevertheless, you have confirmed what we suspected. You're the most gifted long-range shooter we have ever identified. The program would benefit greatly from your formal participation. The program that manipulated my entire life without my knowledge. The program that used my grandfather to shape me into a weapon. Ren's voice was steady but cold. Why would I agree to be part of that? Because the alternative is watching your talents go to waste. Webb gestured at the compound around them. You could complete this selection course. You could become a special operator. But you would be using a fraction of your capabilities on missions that do not require them. He stepped closer. With Project Longshot, you would be deployed on operations that matter. Targets that no one else can reach. Missions that change the course of history. Like Ahmad Rashid? Webb nodded. Like Rashid and others. Men who hide behind distance and terrain because they believe no one can touch them. Men who would continue killing Americans if not for shooters like you. Ren considered his words. Part of her wanted to reject everything he represented. The secrecy, the manipulation, the way he had treated her life as an experiment to be observed rather than a journey to be respected. But another part of her recognized the truth in what he was saying. She had a gift, a rare and extraordinary ability that could save lives and protect the country she had sworn to serve. The question was whether she could use that gift on her own terms. "I will consider your offer," she said finally. "But I have conditions." Webb raised an eyebrow. "What conditions?" "First, I want full access to everything you have on Project Longshot. The history, the other operatives, everything my grandfather was involved in. No more secrets." "Agreed." "Second, I choose my own missions. I will not be a tool that you point at targets. I will be a partner who decides which shots are worth taking." Webb hesitated. "That is not how the program operates." "Then change how it operates. Or find another shooter." The silence stretched between them. Around them, the candidates and instructors watched with bated breath, sensing that they were witnessing something that went far beyond a simple evaluation. Finally, Webb nodded slowly. "Very well. We can discuss the details of a partnership arrangement." And third, Wren looked past Webb to where Hollister stood watching the exchange. "Commander Hollister and the candidates here today witnessed what I can do. They deserve to know the truth about why I was sent here. No more classified files and hidden agendas." Webb's jaw tightened. "That information is sensitive. So is trust. And I will not work with people who do not have the full picture." Another long pause. Then Webb exhaled slowly. "I will arrange a briefing. But understand that what I share cannot leave this compound. These people will be bound by the same classification restrictions that have protected your record. They can handle it." Webb studied her for a moment longer, then turned to address the assembled group. "What you witnessed today is classified at the highest levels," he announced. "Chief Adebayo's capabilities and the program she is being recruited into are matters of national security. You will not discuss what you saw with anyone outside this group." He paused to let his words sink in. "But you deserve to understand what you witnessed. Chief Petty Officer Wren Adebayo holds the record for the longest confirmed kill in United States military history. 3,247 meters, achieved during a classified operation in Afghanistan 3 years ago. What she did today proves that shot was not an anomaly. It was a demonstration of skills that place her among the most elite shooters who have ever lived." The candidates stared at Wren with new eyes. Even Rourke, who had spent weeks trying to break her, looked shaken by the magnitude of what he was hearing. Torres stepped forward. "Why was this kept secret? A record like that should have made her famous." "Because fame creates targets," Webb replied. "And because Chief Adebayo's skills are too valuable to be compromised by public attention. Every enemy of this country would love to know that we have a shooter capable of reaching them from 2 miles away. Keeping that capability hidden is itself a strategic advantage." He turned back to Wren. "You asked for transparency. This is the beginning. The rest will come when you formally join the program." "If I join," Wren corrected. Webb allowed himself a thin smile. "If you join." He walked back toward his vehicle, leaving Wren surrounded by candidates who were only beginning to understand who they had been training alongside for the past weeks. Micah pushed through the crowd to stand beside her. 2 miles, he said, shaking his head. "You shot someone from 2 miles away, and you have been here the whole time, letting Rourke treat you like dirt, letting everyone underestimate you." Wren looked at him. "Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people underestimate you. It gives you room to work. And now that everyone knows, now we see what happens next." She looked toward Hollister, who had not moved from his position. His expression had changed again. The wonder was still there, but it had been joined by something else. Something that looked like the beginning of a question he did not know how to ask. Whatever that question was, Wren suspected the answer would determine everything that came after. The sun was setting over the Pacific when Wren found herself alone on the seawall behind the barracks. The compound had been buzzing with activity since her demonstration, candidates and instructors alike processing what they had witnessed and what it meant for everything they thought they understood about the selection program. She needed quiet. She needed space to think about Webb's offer and the future that was unfolding before her like a road she had never expected to travel. The sound of boots on concrete announced that her solitude was about to end. She did not turn around, but she recognized the cadence of the footsteps. Commander Hollister walked differently than anyone else on base, his stride carrying the weight of 20 years of operations and decisions that had shaped who he had become. He stopped beside her and stood in silence for a long moment, both of them watching the sun paint the water in shades of orange and gold. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. Wren glanced at him but did not respond. She had learned that sometimes the most important thing was to let people find their own words. "When you arrived at this compound, I made a decision about who you were before I ever gave you a chance to show me." Hollister's voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "I saw a woman in a world that I believed should belong only to men, and I decided you were a threat to everything I had spent my career protecting." "Why?" The question hung in the air between them. Hollister did not answer immediately. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph, creased and faded from years of being carried and consulted. "His name was Michael Torres," he said. "No relation to the lieutenant. He was my best friend. We went through BUD/S together. We served on the same team for 6 years. He was the finest operator I ever knew." Wren looked at the photograph. It showed 2 young men in combat gear, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera with the invincible confidence of warriors who had not yet learned that death could find them too. "What happened to him?" Hollister was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with old pain. "We were on an operation in Yemen. Extraction of a high-value intelligence asset. The asset was a woman, an analyst who had been embedded with a terrorist cell and had intelligence that could save hundreds of lives." He put the photograph away. "The extraction went wrong. We were ambushed. Michael was providing cover fire while I got the asset to the helicopter. A round caught him in the throat. He bled out before we could get him to a medic. I am sorry." Hollister shook his head. "For years, I blamed her. The asset. I told myself that if she had moved faster, if she had not frozen when the shooting started, Michael would still be alive. I built an entire philosophy around the idea that women did not belong in combat because they could not handle the pressure." He turned to face Wren directly. "But that was a lie I told myself because I could not accept the truth. Michael died because he made a choice. He chose to stay in an exposed position to give us time to reach the helicopter. He chose to sacrifice himself. The asset did not kill him. His own courage did." Wren felt something shift in her chest. The anger she had carried toward Hollister since her first day at Coronado began to loosen its grip. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I spent 20 years blaming women for something that was never their fault. I spent 20 years fighting against integration, against giving people like you a fair chance, because I could not face my own grief." Hollister's eyes were bright with emotion he was struggling to contain. "And then you showed up, and you endured everything I threw at you, and you made a shot that should have been impossible, and I realized that I had been wrong about everything." Wren did not know what to say. She had expected many things from Commander Hollister, but confession and vulnerability had not been among them. "There is something else," Hollister continued. "Something I learned today that changes what I thought I knew about that operation in Yemen." He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a folded document. "After Webb's briefing, I made some calls of my own. I asked questions I should have asked 15 years ago, and I found out that the intelligence asset Michael died protecting did not freeze during the ambush." Wren took the document and unfolded it. It was a classified after-action report, heavily redacted but still readable in places. "She saved 3 other members of the team," Hollister said. "While I was getting her to the helicopter, she picked up a fallen weapon and provided suppressing fire that allowed 3 wounded operators to reach cover. The official report was buried because her role was classified, but the men she saved knew the truth." He took the document back and folded it carefully. "I have spent 15 years hating someone who was actually a hero. I have spent 15 years punishing every woman who reminded me of her because I could not face the fact that my best friend died, saving someone who deserved to be saved. His voice broke slightly on the last words. I am sorry, Ren, for how I treated you, for how I treated every woman who came through this program. I was fighting ghosts, and you paid the price for my inability to let them go. Ren stood in silence, processing everything he had shared. The sunset had deepened to purple and red, the day dying around them as old wounds began to heal. I cannot give you back the time you lost, she said finally. I cannot undo the damage you did to other candidates who came before me, but I can accept your apology. She met his eyes, and I can tell you that Michael would be proud of you for finally facing the truth. Something in Hollister's expression cracked open. For a moment, he looked like a man who had been carrying an impossible weight for decades and had finally been given permission to set it down. Thank you, he said quietly. They stood together in the fading light, two warriors from different worlds who had found unexpected common ground. What happens now? Ren asked. Now you have a decision to make. Webb wants you for Project Longshot. The selection program still wants to graduate you as an operator. Hollister paused. And I want to recommend you for something else. What? A training position. Here at Coronado. Hollister turned to face the compound behind them. The candidates who watched you today will never forget what they saw. You showed them that impossible is just a word. Imagine what you could do if you spent your career teaching others to believe the same thing. Ren considered his words. She thought about her grandfather, who had spent decades passing on his knowledge to anyone willing to learn. She thought about the young candidates like Micah who needed someone to believe in them when they could not believe in themselves. She thought about the shot she had made today and all the shots she had made before it, and she wondered whether her legacy should be measured in targets eliminated or in lives inspired. I will think about it, she said. Hollister nodded. That is all I ask. He reached into his jacket one more time and pulled out something small and metallic. He held out to her, and Ren saw that it was a sealed trident, the golden insignia that represented everything the special operations community stood for. This was Michael's, Hollister said. I have carried it for 15 years. I want you to have it. Ren stared at the trident. I cannot accept this. I am not a SEAL. Not yet. But you earned something today that goes beyond any insignia or title. Hollister pressed the trident into her hand. Michael believed that courage was not about being fearless. It was about being afraid and doing the hard thing anyway. You showed more courage in the past week than most operators show in their entire careers. Ren closed her fingers around the metal and felt its weight settle into her palm. Thank you, she said, for this, and for finally seeing me. Hollister smiled, and for the first time, there was genuine warmth in it. I think I am just starting to see you, Chief Adebayo, and I suspect there is a lot more to discover. He turned and walked back toward the compound, leaving her alone with the sunset and the trident and the question of what she would do with everything she had earned. The stars were beginning to emerge when Micah found her still standing on the seawall. The whole compound is looking for you, he said. Torres organized a celebration. Everyone wants to toast the woman who just made the impossible look easy. Ren smiled slightly. I am not sure I am in the mood for a celebration. Then what are you in the mood for? She looked at the trident in her hand, then at the darkening sky, then at the young man who had stood by her side through everything. I am in the mood to figure out what comes next. Micah nodded slowly. Whatever you decide, you will not be doing it alone. You have people who believe in you now, people who would follow you anywhere. He gestured toward the compound, where lights were beginning to flicker on in the windows. Come on, let them thank you for showing them what is possible. You can figure out the future tomorrow. Ren took one last look at the ocean, then followed him toward the lights and the sounds of celebration. Tomorrow she would make her decision. Tonight, she would let herself be proud of what she had accomplished. The graduation ceremony took place on a bright California morning, the kind of day that made it impossible to believe that darkness existed anywhere in the world. 23 candidates stood in formation on the grinder, their uniforms crisp and their faces proud. They had survived everything the selection program had thrown at them, and today they would receive the recognition they had earned. Ren stood at the front of the formation, her position a reflection of something that had shifted in the weeks since her impossible shot. She was no longer an outsider to be tested and challenged. She was a leader to be respected and followed. Commander Hollister stood at the podium with a stack of certificates and an expression that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who had seen him on the first day of the program. The hostility was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine pride. Today we recognize 23 warriors who have proven themselves worthy of the Special Operations community, Hollister announced. They have endured physical challenges that would break ordinary men and women. They have demonstrated mental resilience in the face of impossible odds. And they have shown the kind of character that defines the finest operators in the world. He paused and let his gaze sweep across the formation. But before we proceed with the individual recognitions, I want to acknowledge someone whose journey through this program taught me something important about leadership and about myself. His eyes found Ren. Chief Petty Officer Ren Adebayo arrived at this compound as an experiment, a political gesture that many of us, myself included, believed was destined to fail. We designed challenges specifically to break her. We created obstacles that were meant to prove she did not belong. He stepped out from behind the podium. Instead, she proved that we were the ones who did not understand. She showed us that courage is not about size or gender or background. It is about the willingness to face impossible odds and refuse to quit. She showed us that the only limits that matter are the ones we place on ourselves. Hollister stopped in front of Ren and extended his hand. Chief Adebayo, on behalf of Naval Special Warfare Command, I apologize for the way you were treated during this program. And I thank you for showing us what true excellence looks like. Ren shook his hand, and the candidates behind her broke into spontaneous applause. Even Rourke, standing at the edge of the formation, joined in with a slow clap that seemed to cost him something to produce. The ceremony continued with individual recognitions. Each candidate received their certificate and a moment of acknowledgement for their specific achievements. Torres was recognized for her marksmanship. Micah was recognized for his improvement and determination. Others were called out for leadership, for teamwork, for the countless small acts of excellence that had carried them through. When Ren's turn came, Hollister did not simply hand her certificate. He called Colonel Webb forward from the audience of dignitaries and family members who had gathered to witness the graduation. Webb approached with a small velvet box in his hands. Chief Adebayo, Webb said, his voice carrying across the silent grinder, in recognition of your extraordinary achievements in service to this country, including actions that cannot be publicly acknowledged, it is my honor to present you with the Intelligence Star. He opened the box to reveal a medal that Ren had never expected to receive. The Intelligence Star was one of the highest honors awarded by the Central Intelligence Agency, given only for acts of exceptional valor in the field of intelligence operations. This medal recognizes your actions during Operation Silent Peak, Webb continued. Actions that saved countless American lives and eliminated a threat that had evaded our best efforts for years. Your skill, your courage, and your dedication to this country represent the finest traditions of American service. He pinned the medal to her uniform, and Ren felt the weight of it settle against her chest like a promise finally kept. The ceremony concluded with Hollister's final remarks, and the formation was dismissed to join their families and friends for celebration. Ren found herself surrounded by candidates who wanted to shake her hand, to take photographs, to simply stand near someone who had become a legend in their eyes. Through the crowd, she saw Lieutenant Commander Shun watching with a quiet smile. He had taken risks to help her, and those risks had paid off. She made a mental note to thank him properly when the celebration died down. Micah pushed through the crowd to reach her side. So what did you decide, he asked. Webb's program? Hollister's training position? Something else entirely? Ren looked at the medal on her chest, then at the trident she had tucked in her pocket, then at the faces of the candidates who had become her family over the past weeks. I'm going to do both, she said. Micah blinked. Both? Webb's program needs shooters who can make impossible shots. But it also needs instructors who can train the next generation to push beyond their limits. Ren smiled. I negotiated a hybrid position. 6 months of operational deployment. 6 months of training new candidates. The best of both worlds. That sounds perfect. It sounded like a lot of work, but it also sounded like exactly what I was meant to do. The crowd began to thin as families departed and candidates headed off to celebrate in their own ways. Ren found a quiet moment to slip away to the seawall, where she had spent so many evenings processing everything that had happened. The Pacific stretched out before her, endless and eternal, its waves rolling in with the same rhythm they had kept since before humans learned to dream. She pulled out her grandfather's scope and held it up to the light. The scratches and worn spots that marked decades of use seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. "I did it, Grandpa," she said quietly. "I show them what we can do." The wind carried her words out over the water, and for a moment, she could almost hear his voice responding, telling her that he was proud, telling her that the journey was just beginning, telling her that impossible was just another word for something worth attempting. If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part. Maybe you connected with Ren's determination, or Hollister's transformation, or the moment when that bullet flew true across 2 miles of California air. Or perhaps you know someone in your own life who was underestimated and proved everyone wrong. We would love to hear your stories of courage and perseverance. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned to find Hollister walking toward her with 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Thought you might want this," he said, offering her one of the cups. She accepted it with a nod of thanks. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the waves roll in. "What was it like?" Hollister asked eventually. "Making that shot in Afghanistan. What did it feel like?" Ren considered the question. She thought about the cold and the wind and the 11 hours of waiting. She thought about the moment when everything had aligned and she had known, with absolute certainty, that her bullet would find its target. "It felt like coming home," she said. "Like everything I had ever learned and everything I had ever been was finally being used for its true purpose." Hollister nodded slowly. "I think I understand that feeling. The first time I led a team into combat, I felt the same thing. Like all the training and all the sacrifice finally made sense." They drank their coffee and watched the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. "You're going to change things," Hollister said. "The candidates you train, the missions you complete, the example you set. You're going to change what people believe is possible." "Maybe," Ren replied. "Or maybe I'm just going to show them what was always possible, what they were always capable of if they were willing to try." She looked at her grandfather's scope one more time, then tucked it safely into her jacket. The path ahead was long and uncertain. There would be more challenges, more doubters, more moments when the shot seemed impossible and the distance seemed too great. But Ren Adebayo had learned something that most people never understood. She had learned that the space between impossible and inevitable was nothing more than patience and precision and the willingness to keep trying when everyone else had given up. She had made the shot that no one believed she could make, and she would keep making impossible shots for as long as her country needed her. The sun touched the water and began to sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the visible world, new targets were waiting. New challenges were forming. New impossible distances were begging to be crossed. Ren Adebayo finished her coffee and smiled. She was ready.